The moment Brielle Sutton's knees buckled and the tray of dirty dishes crashed to the floor, she knew she'd pushed herself too far this time. Her vision had been swimming for the last hour, black spots dancing at the edges as she'd forced herself through one more table, one more order, one more smile that felt like lifting weights with her facial muscles. The exhaustion had been building for weeks, double shifts at the diner to cover rent, night classes 3 times a week for her business degree, and exactly 4 hours of sleep per night if she was lucky. Her body had been screaming warnings she'd ignored because bills didn't pay themselves and dreams didn't chase themselves, and nobody was coming to rescue her from this endless grind. The crash of ceramic shattering on tile was the last sound she heard before darkness swallowed her whole. When consciousness crept back, it came in fragments, silk against her cheek, impossibly soft, a scent like winter storms and old leather. The feeling of movement, of being carried with effortless strength, and a coldness that should have been uncomfortable, but instead felt soothing against her overheated skin. Brielle's eyes fluttered open to a sight that made no logical sense. She was staring up at the most beautiful face she'd ever seen, and it definitely didn't belong to anyone who worked at Sullivan's Diner. Pale skin that seemed to glow in the dim light, sharp aristocratic features that looked carved from marble, and hair so white it appeared silver, falling in elegant waves past his shoulders. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of frozen mercury gray with an almost metallic sheen that no human eye should possess. "Easy," he said, and his voice was like dark velvet, cultured and ancient despite appearing no older than his mid-20s. "You collapsed. Don't try to move yet." Brielle realized she was being carried through what appeared to be a back alley behind the diner, though the shadows seemed deeper than they should be, the darkness almost alive. Something heavy and luxurious was draped over her, a coat that smelled like him, lined with silk and impossibly warm despite the coldness of his body beneath. "Who?" Her voice came out hoarse. She tried to sit up, but his arms tightened around her with casual, absolute strength. "My name is Xavian Corvus," he said, still walking with that preternatural grace, not even slightly burdened by her weight. "And you are going to let me help you before you kill yourself with exhaustion." Reality snapped back into focus with all its mundane urgency. Brielle pushed against his chest, panic flooding through the fog of her fatigue. "Put me down! I have to! I'm in the middle of my shift! My boss is going to fire me! I can't afford to lose this job!" "You collapsed in the middle of the dining room," Xavian said calmly, those strange mercury eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your employer was more concerned about the broken dishes than your well-being. I paid for the damages and informed him you were leaving." "You what?" Horror cleared the last of the fuzziness from her mind. "You can't just, I need that job. You need rest, you need food, you need someone to ensure you don't work yourself into an early grave." His tone was absolute, commanding, as if he expected his words to simply reshape reality to his will. "And since you clearly have no one else performing that function, I'm assuming the responsibility." "You're insane!" Brielle shoved harder against his chest, and this time, he actually stopped walking. They stood in the alley, shadows pooling around them like living things, and she realized the streetlight at the entrance was flickering in a way that seemed almost deliberate. "You're a complete stranger. Put me down right now or I'm screaming." Something flickered across his perfect features, amusement mixed with something darker, more dangerous. "If that's what you wish." He set her down with careful precision, steadying her when her legs nearly buckled again, and Brielle had to grab his forearm to keep from falling. Even through the expensive fabric of his shirt, his skin felt cold as ice. Wrong. Everything about this was wrong. She took a step back, putting distance between them, and really looked at him for the first time. He was tall, well over 6 feet, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than her yearly income, black slacks that fit perfectly, a deep burgundy shirt under a vest that looked like something from another century, and the coat he'd draped over her was clearly the matching piece, cut in a style that seemed both timeless and distinctly old world. Everything about him screamed wealth and power and danger. "Thank you for catching me," Brielle said, trying to inject firmness into her voice even as she swayed on her feet. "But I'm fine now. I just skipped lunch. Low blood sugar. It happens." "You're a terrible liar." Xavian tilted his head, studying her with those unsettling eyes, and she had the distinct impression of being assessed by a predator. Your heartbeat is erratic, you're malnourished and sleep-deprived, you have bruises under your eyes and your hands are shaking. When was the last time you had a proper meal? A full night's sleep? That's none of your business. Perhaps not, but I'm making it my business regardless. The sheer arrogance of that statement should have made her angry, but Brielle was too tired for anger. She was tired down to her bones, down to her soul, the kind of exhaustion that had become her constant companion. For just a moment, the fantasy of letting someone else take charge, of having someone actually care whether she ate or slept, was so tempting it hurt. Then reality crashed back. Stranger. Danger. Wrong. I'm going home, she said, turning toward the mouth of the alley. Thank you again, but... The world tilted sideways, and suddenly Xavian was there, catching her before she hit the ground again, his movements too fast to track, impossibly fast, inhumanly fast. Stubborn creature, he murmured, and there was something almost fond in his tone. Very well. We'll do this the difficult way. Before Brielle could process what was happening, he'd swept her back into his arms and was moving through the shadows with that impossible speed. The world blurred around them, darkness and flickering lights, and the sensation of covering far more distance than should be possible in mere seconds. She tried to protest, to struggle, but exhaustion dragged at her like chains, and his arms were stronger than iron, and some treacherous part of her brain whispered that this felt safe, felt protected, felt like she could finally stop fighting for just a moment. When the movement stopped, they were no longer in the alley. Brielle found herself being carried through an entrance that looked like something from a historical mansion, all dark wood and Gothic architecture, with wrought iron fixtures that held actual candles rather than electric lights. The hallway beyond was lined with paintings in heavy frames, portraits of pale, beautiful people with the same otherworldly quality as Xavian. The air smelled old, like libraries and wine cellars and secrets. "Where are we?" she managed, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "My residence." Xavian pushed through a heavy wooden door into a room that made Brielle's breath catch despite her fear. It was a bedroom the size of her entire apartment, dominated by a massive four-poster bed draped in midnight blue silk. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that looked ancient. A fireplace large enough to stand in crackled with real flames that cast dancing shadows across thick carpets and furniture that belonged in a museum. He set her down on a velvet chaise near the fire, then removed his coat from her shoulders, only to wrap her in a blanket that appeared from nowhere, his movements efficient and strangely gentle. Brielle's mind was screaming at her to run, to fight, to do something, but her body had staged a complete rebellion. She couldn't remember the last time she'd sat on something so comfortable, felt warmth soak into her bones like this. "I'm calling the police," she said, though she made no move toward the phone she couldn't see anywhere in this anachronistic room. And tell them what?" Xavian settled into a chair across from her with the fluid grace of a cat. "That I brought you somewhere warm and safe instead of leaving you unconscious in an alley? That I intend to feed you and ensure you rest? Terrible crimes indeed. This is kidnapping. This is intervention." He steepled his fingers, regarding her with those mercury eyes. "Tell me, Brielle Sutton, yes? I saw your name tag. When was the last time anyone cared whether you lived or died?" The words hit like a physical blow, finding the soft, vulnerable place she kept carefully hidden. Brielle felt tears prick her eyes and hated herself for it, hated him for seeing straight through her defenses. "That's not, you don't know anything about me." "I know you're alone," Xavian said quietly. "I know you're working yourself to death trying to build something better. I know that no one noticed you were at your breaking point until you literally collapsed. And I know that you're approximately 3 missed meals away from a hospital stay you cannot afford." Each observation was accurate and horrible, and Brielle wanted to deny all of it but couldn't force the lies past her lips. Instead, she pulled the blanket tighter around herself and looked away from that too knowing gaze. "Why do you care?" she whispered. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. When Xavian finally spoke, his voice held something she couldn't quite identify, something ancient and lonely and hungering. "Because I know what it is to be so isolated that you forget what it feels like to be seen," he said. "And because when I looked at you tonight, I saw something precious about to break. I could not allow that. Brielle's head jerked up, meeting his eyes again. In the firelight, they seemed to glow slightly, that silver sheen catching the flames in a way that was definitely not normal. Everything about him was not normal. The impossible speed, the unnatural cold of his skin, the ageless quality to his features, the old-world manner of speaking. Puzzle pieces clicked together in her exhausted mind, forming a picture that should have been impossible, but suddenly made terrible sense. "You're not human," she said. Xavian's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Very perceptive. Most don't realize until it's far too late." "What are you?" He rose from his chair with that liquid grace, moving to the fireplace to stare into the flames. The light played across his pale skin, his silver hair, and Brielle thought wildly that he looked like something from a Gothic painting, beautiful and terrible and utterly inhuman. "I am what your legends call vampire," Xavian said, his voice soft but carrying easily across the room. "I'm centuries old. I'm the king of the northern bloodline, ruler of my kind in this territory. And you, Brielle Sutton, have somehow caught my attention in a way no mortal has in decades." Terror should have been her first response. Instead, Brielle felt an odd sense of pieces falling into place, of mysteries explaining themselves, the shadows that had seemed alive, the impossible speed, the cold skin and metallic eyes and anachronistic surroundings. Vampires, of course vampires, because her life wasn't complicated enough already. "Am I going to die?" she asked, proud that her voice barely shook. Xavian turned to face her, and something fierce flashed across his features. "No. I give you my word on this. By the old blood and the ancient laws, you are under my protection now. No harm will come to you while I draw breath from my kind or any other." "Why?" The word burst out of her, carrying all her confusion and fear and that dangerous thread of hope. Why would a vampire king care about a broke waitress who collapsed at work? What could you possibly want from me? He moved then, crossing the distance between them to kneel before her chaise, bringing his face level with hers. This close, she could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the way his skin was almost translucent in its paleness, the absolute stillness of someone who didn't need to breathe. But his eyes held something raw and startlingly vulnerable. "I want nothing from you except your well-being," Xavian said, each word careful and precise. "I have wealth beyond measure and power that makes mortals tremble. I have lived through the rise and fall of kingdoms. But in all those centuries, I have forgotten what it is to feel protective of something fragile. When I saw you fall, when I caught you and felt how your brave, stubborn heart kept beating despite everything your body was telling you." He paused, something like wonder crossing his features. "I felt something I thought I'd lost. Purpose, the desire to shield something precious from harm." Brielle's breath caught in her throat. She should be terrified. She should be screaming. Instead, she found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by the raw honesty in his words. "That's insane," she whispered. "You don't even know me." "Then let me know you." His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of dark hair from her face with surprising gentleness. "Stay. Rest. Let me help you. If you wish to leave after you've recovered your strength, I will not stop you. But please, Brielle, stop trying to carry the weight of your world alone." It was the please that undid her. This ancient, powerful being asking rather than commanding, offering rather than taking, seeing her exhaustion not as weakness, but as evidence of strength pushed too far. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, and then she was crying properly, great shaking sobs of exhaustion and relief, and too many emotions to name. Xavian made a soft sound and gathered her carefully into his arms, holding her against his chest while she soaked his expensive shirt with tears. His hand stroked her hair with surprising tenderness, and he murmured something in a language she didn't recognize, but that sounded like comfort. When the storm finally passed, Brielle found herself cradled against him, wrapped in his supernatural cold, like a living shield against the world. She should pull away. She should run. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. "I don't understand this," she said quietly against his chest. "Neither do I," Xavian admitted, and she could hear the truth in his voice. But I know what I feel, and I know what I want. Let me care for you, fierce one. Let me be what you need. Brielle thought about her empty apartment, her mounting bills, her bone-deep exhaustion. She thought about collapsing alone and waking up in the arms of something impossible. She thought about mercury eyes that saw straight through her defenses and a voice that promised protection she'd never had. It was stupid. It was dangerous. It was probably going to end badly. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She felt rather than heard his exhale, the subtle release of tension in his frame. Then he was lifting her again, carrying her to the massive bed and settling her among pillows that felt like clouds. He drew the covers up around her, tucking them with careful precision. "Sleep," Xavian commanded gently. "When you wake, I'll have food prepared. Real food, not whatever garbage you've been surviving on, and we will discuss how to improve your circumstances." "Bossy," Brielle mumbled, but the word held no heat. Her eyes were already closing, exhaustion finally claiming its victory now that she'd stopped fighting it. The last thing she felt before sleep dragged her under was the ghost of lips against her forehead, cold as winter and soft as silk, and a whispered promise in that ancient voice. "I will keep you safe, brave one. This I swear." Brielle woke to the smell of food, real food, the kind that made her stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. For a moment, she was disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, the silk sheets against her skin, the massive room filled with dancing firelight. Then, memory crashed back, collapsing at work, impossible speed through shadows, mercury eyes, and a voice like dark velvet. Vampires. She'd been rescued by a vampire. The Vampire King, if his words were to be believed. Sitting up slowly, Brielle took stock of her situation. She was still wearing her diner uniform, though someone, Xavian, presumably had removed her shoes. The room was exactly as she remembered, gothic and luxurious and seemingly untouched by the modern world beyond its walls. Through a set of tall windows, she could see it was dark outside, though she had no idea if that meant hours had passed or an entire day. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she called, her voice still rough with sleep. Xavian entered carrying a silver tray laden with dishes that made her mouth water. He'd changed clothes, now wearing black pants and a white shirt that somehow made him look even more like something from another era. His white hair was pulled back loosely, revealing the elegant lines of his face, and those strange eyes found hers immediately with an intensity that made her heart skip. "You slept for 14 hours, he said, setting the tray on a small table near the windows and gesturing for her to join him. "Your body clearly needed it." Brielle slid out of bed, her legs steadier than they'd been in weeks. 14 hours. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept that long. "What time is it?" 8 in the evening. By your kind standards, dinner time." He pulled out a chair for her with old-fashioned courtesy. "Though I suspect any time would be dinner time given how long you've been neglecting yourself." She should have bristled at his tone, but the food demanded all her attention. The tray held things she hadn't eaten in months, a perfectly cooked steak, roasted vegetables that actually looked fresh, bread that was clearly homemade, and something chocolate for dessert. Her stomach growled loudly enough that Xavian's lips twitched in amusement. "Eat," he said simply, settling into the chair across from her. "We can talk after you've satisfied your immediate needs." Brielle didn't need to be told twice. She fell on the food with an enthusiasm that might have embarrassed her if she'd had the capacity to care. Everything was perfectly prepared, seasoned in ways that made her want to cry because she'd forgotten food could taste like this. Xavian watched her eat with an expression of satisfaction that seemed disproportionate to the simple act of providing a meal. "You're not eating," she observed between bites, then felt stupid. "Oh, right, vampire." "I have different dietary requirements," Xavian agreed smoothly, "though I do remember enjoying food once upon a time. It's been centuries since such things held appeal." The casual mention of centuries should have felt surreal, but somehow it didn't. Nothing about this situation felt as strange as it should, which was perhaps the strangest thing of all. Brielle found herself curious rather than frightened, watching him watch her with those luminous eyes. "So what do vampires eat?" she asked, then immediately wanted to take it back because the answer was obvious and potentially terrifying. "Braid, though." "Blood," Xavian said, his tone matter-of-fact. Primarily from donors who were compensated generously for their contribution. My kind abandoned indiscriminate hunting centuries ago. We have laws, structure, a society that functions parallel to yours. The myths about mindless monsters are largely propaganda from our less civilized days. Donors, Brielle repeated slowly. People volunteer to be food sources? People volunteer to participate in a mutually beneficial exchange. We feed and we can provide our donors with certain advantages, enhanced healing, extended lifespan in some cases, protection. Many members of your society's elite have connections to my kind, whether they acknowledge it or not. He leaned back in his chair, regarding her steadily. I'm telling you this because I want no misunderstandings between us. I am a predator by nature, Brielle. But I am not a monster, and you have nothing to fear from me. She believed him, which was probably foolish but felt true in her bones. Something about Xavian radiated a kind of controlled power, the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove because his strength was absolute. He could have hurt her a dozen times already if that was his intention. Why me? Brielle asked, setting down her fork. You still haven't really explained why you care about some random human you've never met before. Xavian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory. I was turned 347 years ago. I was a lord's son, arrogant and ambitious and utterly convinced of my own importance. The vampire who turned me saw potential or perhaps just wanted a plaything. Either way, I became what I am now. I clawed my way to power over centuries, built an empire in the shadows, became the king my ambition had always craved. He paused, and something haunted flickered across his features. But in all that time, in all that power, I forgot what it felt like to want something beyond conquest, to care about something fragile. When I saw you collapse, when I caught you and felt the flutter of your heartbeat against my chest, something in me recognized something in you. A fighter, someone pushing past their limits out of sheer stubborn will, and I thought, here is something precious, here is something I want to protect. Brielle's throat felt tight. That's a lot of pressure to put on a stranger. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are, Xavian said quietly. I'm offering you the resources to stop slowly destroying yourself. A place to stay where you won't worry about rent, food so you stop skipping meals, time to focus on your studies instead of working yourself into an early grave. In exchange, I ask only that you let me be in your presence, that you allow me the privilege of knowing you. That doesn't sound like an equal exchange. Perhaps not by conventional standards, but for me, the chance to feel something beyond the endless monotony of immortal existence is worth more than gold. The raw honesty in his words made Brielle's heart ache. She thought about going back to her life, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the constant struggle. Then she looked at this impossible being who claimed to be a vampire king and offered her sanctuary for nothing more than her company. I need to understand what this is, she said carefully. Are you asking me to be your donor? Is this about blood? Xavian's eyes flashed with something fierce. No, I have donors I've worked with for decades. I would never feed from you without your explicit, enthusiastic consent, and even then only if you truly desired it. This is not about sustenance, Brielle. This is about connection. Connection, she repeated, testing the word. You want us to be friends? I want us to be whatever we become naturally. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. I want to know what makes you laugh, what you dream about when you finally sleep, why you're pushing yourself so hard for that degree. I want to help you build the life you're fighting for, and perhaps if I'm fortunate, I want you to see me as something more than a monster from legends. Her heart was beating too fast, and from the slight tilt of his head she knew he could hear it. This was insane. She should leave. She should run back to her normal, exhausting, lonely life, where at least the rules made sense. I'm supposed to work tonight, she said instead. I have classes tomorrow. You were fired, Xavian said bluntly. I contacted the diner while you slept. Your employer was unpleasant about the circumstances of your departure. I may have purchased the establishment out of spite and had him removed from the premises. Brielle stared at him. You bought the diner? I bought the entire building. The diner, the apartments above it, and the parking lot. I'm having it converted into something that will actually treat its employees with basic human decency. He said it as casually as someone might describe buying groceries. You're welcome to work there once the renovations are complete, if you wish, though you won't need to financially. You can't just, she broke off, because clearly he could and had. That's insane. That's having resources and choosing to use them for something meaningful. Xavian's expression remained calm, unrepentant. You needed to be free of that place. Now you are. Brielle didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Part of her wanted to be angry at his high-handedness, but a larger part was dizzy with relief at having that particular burden lifted. No more Howard the handsy cook, no more Tom the terrible manager who docked pay for broken dishes, no more 12-hour shifts that left her swaying on her feet. What about my apartment? She asked quietly. I had someone pack your belongings while you slept. They're in the room next door. Your lease has been paid through the end with a glowing reference for your next landlord. He paused. Though I hope you'll consider staying here instead. I have more than enough space, and the wards around this residence will keep you safer than any apartment ever could. Wards? Magical protections. My kind has enemies, both supernatural and mortal. This place is a fortress in ways you can't see but will certainly benefit from. His eyes held hers steadily. I meant what I said about protection, Brielle. Under my care, you'll be safer than you've ever been. It was too much. All of it was too much. Brielle stood abruptly, pacing to the windows to stare out at the night. They were somewhere high up. She realized she could see the glitter of the city spread out below, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Beautiful and distant, and nothing like her usual street-level view of dumpsters and cracked pavement. This is moving too fast, she said to the glass. Yesterday I was a waitress barely making rent. Today I'm in a vampire king's mansion being offered a completely different life. How is any of this real? She heard him stand, felt his presence at her back, though he didn't touch her. I know it's overwhelming. I know I'm asking you to trust someone you have every reason to fear. But Brielle, his voice softened. How long has it been since anyone offered to make your life easier? How long since someone wanted to help without expecting something in return? Too long. Forever. Never, maybe. Brielle closed her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. Her whole life had been about surviving, about pushing through on her own because there was nobody else to depend on. Her parents had died when she was 19, leaving her with nothing but debt and determination. Every step forward had been clawed from the universe through pure, stubborn will, and now this impossible being was offering to just give her the space to breathe, to build, to become something more than exhausted. What if I want to leave? She asked quietly. What if I try this and it doesn't work? Then you leave, Xavian said simply. I'll ensure you're set up somewhere safe with enough funds to finish your education. You'll never see me again if that's your wish. I'm not a captor, Brielle. I'm offering sanctuary, not a cage. She turned to face him, searching those strange eyes for any hint of deception. Found none, only that raw sincerity that seemed to characterize everything about him. He meant it, all of it. This ancient, powerful creature genuinely wanted nothing more than to help her, to know her, to be in her presence. Okay, Brielle said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. I'll stay. For now. We'll see how this goes. The smile that broke across Xavian's face was radiant, transforming him from merely beautiful to absolutely breathtaking. Thank you, he said, and the genuine gratitude in his voice made her chest tight. You won't regret this, I swear it. I'm definitely going to regret this, she muttered, but she was smiling despite herself. I'm staying in a vampire's house. This is how horror movies start. I prefer to think of it as how great romances begin, Xavian said lightly, then seemed to catch himself. Not that I'm presuming, I only meant, you're flustered, Brielle said with delight, watching the composed vampire king actually stumble over his words. The ancient immortal is flustered. You're more dangerous than you appear, Xavian said, but his eyes were warm with amusement. Come, let me show you your room properly. You should rest more after you finish eating. I slept for 14 hours, and you needed every minute. Humor me. The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality, as if Brielle had stepped sideways into a parallel existence. Xavian's residence, she learned it was a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a historic building he owned, became her sanctuary in ways she'd never experienced. Her room was adjacent to his, gorgeously appointed with that same Gothic elegance, and he'd somehow acquired everything she might need without her asking. Her belongings from her apartment looked shabby in their new surroundings, but Xavian never commented. Instead, he simply made sure she had access to anything she wanted. New clothes appeared in the closet, perfectly sized. A laptop better than anything she could have afforded showed up on the desk. Books she'd mentioned wanting to read materialized on shelves. "You have to stop spending money on me," Brielle protested after the third day, when she discovered her textbooks for the semester stacked neatly beside the laptop. "Why?" Xavian asked, genuinely puzzled. They were in his library, a 2-story room filled with books in a dozen languages. He was reading something in what looked like Latin while she tried to focus on an economics assignment. "I have wealth I've accumulated over centuries with nothing meaningful to spend it on. You need things. The logic is simple. It feels like charity. It's investment." He set down his book, giving her his full attention in that intense way of his. "You're brilliant, Brielle. I've seen your grades, the notes in your textbooks. You're going to build something significant once you have your degree. I'm simply ensuring you have the resources to reach your potential faster." "You looked at my grades?" "I may have obtained your academic records, for security purposes." He had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "I wanted to understand what drove you. The answer was clear: you're exceptional, and you've been achieving it while exhausted and malnourished. Imagine what you'll accomplish properly, rested and fed." Brielle should have been angry about the invasion of privacy, but she was too struck by the genuine pride in his voice. Nobody had ever looked at her accomplishments that way, like they mattered beyond their immediate utility. "You're very strange for a vampire king," she said quietly. "And you're very strange for a human," Xavian replied with a slight smile. "Most would be cowering in fear or trying to seduce me for power. You do neither. You challenge me, question me, make me explain myself at every turn. It's refreshing. Someone has to keep your ego in check. My ego has gone unchecked for 3 centuries. I suspect it's a lost cause." But his eyes were warm as he returned to his book, and Brielle found herself smiling as she went back to her assignment. The routine they developed felt natural in ways that should have been impossible. Xavian kept mostly nocturnal hours, as his nature demanded, but he adjusted his schedule to overlap with hers. Mornings she spent at classes or studying, while he slept in his room behind blackout curtains. Afternoons they might share a meal, her eating, him keeping her company with tea he claimed to still enjoy the ritual of preparing. Evenings were for conversation, for books in the library, for him teaching her things about history he'd actually lived through. "You're telling me you met Shakespeare?" Brielle asked one night, nearly dropping her coffee mug. "Once, briefly. Arrogant man, brilliant with words, but insufferable in person. Kept trying to write plays about my kind without understanding anything about us." Xavian's expression was amused with memory. "I may have been the inspiration for certain vampiric elements in his later works, though he got most of the details wrong." "That's impossible. That's my existence." He gestured around the library. "Half these books are first editions I acquired when they were simply new publications. That portrait in the hallway is by an artist whose name you'd recognize from museums. I've walked through history, Brielle, and now I get to share those memories with someone who appreciates them." She did appreciate them. She appreciated everything about these strange evenings, the way Xavian would gesture animatedly when discussing something he was passionate about, the rare smiles that transformed his face, the growing ease between them. He was teaching her without meaning to not just history, but languages, politics, the hidden supernatural world that existed beneath the surface of normal society. "There are more of you?" she asked one evening. "More vampires?" "Hundreds in this city alone, thousands worldwide. We have territories, bloodlines, councils that govern our kind. The northern bloodline that I rule is one of 4 major powers in North America." Xavian's tone turned serious. "It's a carefully balanced system. We maintain the masquerade, the illusion that we don't exist to prevent panic and persecution. But among ourselves, we have our own society, complete with laws and consequences for those who break them. And you're the king of one of these bloodlines. I am. I claimed the territory through right of combat 200 years ago and have held it since. It's not a position without its burdens. I'm responsible for every vampire in my territory, for maintaining order, for dealing with those who would threaten the masquerade or prey on mortals without consent. His eyes met hers. It's why the protection I offer you is absolute. No vampire would dare harm someone under the personal protection of the king. The reminder of what he was, the power he held, the danger he represented should have frightened her. Instead, Brielle felt safer than she'd ever been. When she walked the city now, sometimes with Xavian accompanying her through evening shadows, she noticed things she'd missed before. The way certain people deferred to him subtly, the way shadows seemed friendlier when he was near, the absolute confidence with which he moved through the world. 2 weeks into her new life, Brielle woke in the middle of the day to sounds of raised voices from somewhere in the penthouse. She pulled on a robe and crept out of her room, following the noise to Xavian's study, a room she'd glimpsed but never entered. The door was ajar, and through it she could see Xavian standing behind an ornate desk, facing 3 other vampires. They were all pale and beautiful in that same inhuman way. 2 men and a woman, dressed in dark clothing that looked both modern and somehow timeless. "Your obsession with this human is causing talk," one of the men was saying, his voice sharp with disapproval. "The court questions your judgment, my lord." "The court may question whatever they wish," Xavian replied, his tone cold as winter. "My personal affairs are not subject to council approval. When those affairs involve keeping a human in your residence, they become everyone's concern." The woman stepped forward, her eyes flashing red. "She's a liability, a weakness that could be exploited. She is under my protection, and anyone who threatens her will answer to me personally." The air around Xavian seemed to grow colder, darker, and Brielle felt power radiating from him like physical force. "I am making myself abundantly clear on this point." "You're making yourself look weak," the second man said. "Vampires don't keep pets, Xavian. We certainly don't rearrange our entire existence for them." The crack of Xavian's hand hitting the desk made all 3 visitors flinch. "You will not speak of her that way. She is not a pet. She is—" He paused, and something vulnerable crossed his features. "She is important to me. That should be sufficient." "It's not," the woman said quietly. "Xavian, we've served you for decades. We're loyal to you. But this human, she's changing you, making you soft. If the other bloodlines sense weakness, then they will learn why I've held this territory for 2 centuries. His voice dropped to something deadly. "I am not weak because I choose to protect someone. I am not diminished because I've found something I care about beyond power. And if anyone from my court or outside it attempts to harm her, I will show them exactly how strong I remain." Brielle's heart was pounding. She should retreat, should pretend she hadn't heard. Instead, she pushed the door open fully and stepped into the study. All 4 vampires turned to look at her, and the weight of their collective attention was almost physical. But Brielle kept her chin up, meeting Xavian's eyes steadily. "I'm the liability they're talking about," she said calmly. "Maybe I should hear this conversation." "Brielle," Xavian started, but she shook her head. "No, they're right that this involves me." She turned to face the 3 visitors, trying not to show her fear. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to collapse at work or to be brought here or to become some kind of political problem. But I'm here now, and clearly that's causing issues for your king. So maybe someone should explain to me exactly what's going on." The woman's eyes narrowed, but there was a hint of respect in her expression. Bold for a human. Desperate, actually. "I'd really like to not be murdered by vampires because I accepted help when I was exhausted." Brielle crossed her arms. "So what's the actual problem here? That your king is being nice to a human? That seems like a pretty low bar for concern." "The problem," the first man said coldly, "is that enemies will see his attachment to you as weakness to exploit. You become a target, which means we have to dedicate resources to protecting you. And for what? A momentary infatuation that will end when you age and die in what amounts to an eye blink of his existence?" The casual cruelty of that statement hit harder than Brielle expected, but she forced herself not to react. "So, this is about resources and optics?" "This is about the stability of the bloodline," the woman said. "We're not monsters, girl. We're trying to protect our people, which includes protecting our king from poor decisions." "I'm not a poor decision," Brielle said quietly, then looked at Xavian. "Am I?" His expression was fierce, almost feral. "Never." He moved around the desk to stand beside her, his presence a solid wall of protection at her back. "And this conversation is over. You've voiced your concerns. I've heard them and rejected them. Brielle stays under my protection, and the bloodline will adapt." "Xavian," the second man started. "I said this conversation is over." Power rolled off Xavian in waves now, and Brielle watched the three vampires actually take a step back. "You serve me or you leave my territory. Those are your options, but you do not question my choices again. Am I understood?" The three exchanged glances, then bowed in perfect unison. "Yes, my lord," they chorused. "Good. Leave us." They filed out without another word, moving with that impossible vampire grace, and then Brielle and Xavian were alone in the study. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. "I'm sorry you heard that," Xavian said finally, his voice gentler than before. "Are they right?" Brielle turned to face him fully. "Am I making you look weak? Am I putting you in danger?" "No." His hands came up to frame her face, cold and careful. "You're making me remember what it is to care about something beyond politics and power. That's not weakness, Brielle. That's what gives existence meaning. But they're right that I'm mortal, that I'll age and die, and you won't." The reality of it sat between them like a stone. "What happens when you're old and I'm unchanged?" Xavian's thumb brushed her cheek softly. "Then I'll have had the privilege of watching you live a full life, of seeing you build everything you're capable of building, and I'll count myself fortunate for whatever time we have. That's a terrible deal for you. That's the best deal I've had in centuries." His smile was sad and genuine. "Don't you see? You've given me something to care about beyond the endless monotony of immortal existence. You've made me feel protective and challenged and alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. However long we have, it will be worth it." Brielle felt tears prick her eyes. "You're going to break my heart, Vampire King. Then we'll be even, because you've already captured mine completely." The kiss happened without conscious decision, meeting in the space between them with an inevitability that felt like fate. His lips were cold against hers, but the feeling behind the kiss was anything but desperate and careful and full of longing barely held in check. Brielle's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and felt his arms wrap around her with that supernatural strength held carefully gentle. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, well, she was breathing hard. He was just watching her with eyes gone molten silver. Xavian rested his forehead against hers. "I told myself I wouldn't do that," he murmured, "that I'd let you come to me in your own time, if ever." "I'm glad you broke your rule." Brielle's voice was shaky but sure. "Because I've wanted you to do that for days and was too afraid to make the first move." "Afraid? You, who challenged 3 hostile vampires without hesitation? Hostile vampires are less terrifying than feelings." But she was smiling as she said it, and felt his chest shake with silent laughter. "I'm falling in love with you," Xavian said quietly, the words carrying the weight of confession. "I know it's too soon. I know it doesn't make sense, but I am, and you deserve to know that before this goes any further." Brielle's heart stuttered. "That's really not fair, saying something like that." "Why not?" "Because now I have to admit I'm falling for you too, and that's terrifying given you're an immortal vampire king, and I'm a broke college student who didn't even know vampires existed 3 weeks ago." "Best love stories start with impossible circumstances," Xavian said, and his smile was radiant. "And just for the record, you're not broke anymore. I transferred funds to your account last week." "Xavian, what? You needed money. I have money. This is not complex reasoning. You can't just—" She broke off because she was laughing and he was grinning, and somehow this was her life now, arguing with a vampire king about money while standing in his arms after their first kiss. Impossible and perfect and absolutely insane. Stay with me, Xavian said softly. Not because you need sanctuary or resources. Stay with me because you want to, because this feeling between us is worth exploring. I'm still mortal, Brielle pointed out, still going to age while you stay frozen. That problem doesn't go away just because we're kissing now. There are options, he said carefully, ways to extend mortal life or even other choices. But those are conversations for later if you want them. For now, I'm simply asking you to be with me for however long we have. It was a terrible idea. It went against every practical instinct she'd developed surviving on her own. But when Brielle looked into those mercury eyes and saw hope and vulnerability and something that looked an awful lot like love, the decision was easier than it should have been. Okay, she said. Yes, I want to stay. I want to see where this goes. His kiss this time was celebratory, spinning her in a circle with superhuman ease before setting her down gently. You've made me happier than I've been in centuries, Xavian said against her hair. I swear I'll be worth the risk. You better be, Brielle replied, but she was smiling as she said it. I'm betting my heart on a vampire. That's gotta be against some kind of survival rule. Every good love story requires breaking a few rules. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Brielle's life, which felt absurd given the supernatural circumstances. But Xavian was attentive in ways she'd never experienced, constantly finding small ways to make her life easier, better, more full of joy. Flowers appeared in her room with notes written in elegant script. Her favorite coffee showed up perfectly prepared each morning. When she mentioned missing a book from her childhood, he somehow tracked down a first edition and left it on her pillow. You're spoiling me, she protested after he arranged for a famous chef to teach her cooking techniques she'd admired. I'm cherishing you, Xavian corrected, pulling her into his lap in the library where they spent most evenings. There's a difference. Spoiling implies excess. Everything I do for you is essential to my happiness. That's ridiculously romantic and also concerning. You can't base your happiness on another person. I've had 3 centuries of basing my happiness on power and solitude. I prefer this version. His arms tightened around her waist. Let me enjoy making you smile, fierce one. It's become my favorite occupation. And she did smile, more than she'd thought possible. Her life transformed in ways both practical and emotional. With her financial burdens lifted, she could focus entirely on school, and her grades went from good to exceptional. She discovered a passion for business ethics she'd never had time to explore before. Her professors noticed, commenting on the marked improvement in her work, the depth of her analyses. Of course your work improved, Xavian said when she mentioned it. You're brilliant. You simply needed the space to show it. He helped with her studies sometimes, offering perspectives from his centuries of experience. His understanding of economics and politics was both historical and deeply practical, shaped by watching empires rise and fall. But he never condescended, never made her feel less for being mortal and young. Instead, he treated her insights with genuine respect, often saying she'd thought of angles he'd missed. How can I possibly surprise you? Brielle asked one evening, after a particularly lively debate about market regulation. You've lived through centuries of this. Because you think differently than I do, Xavian said simply. Your mortality gives you urgency. You understand stakes in ways I've forgotten. You remind me that time matters, that change is necessary. You make me better, Brielle. It was comments like that, casual and sincere, that made her fall deeper. She was learning the layers beneath the Vampire King exterior. Yes, Xavian was powerful and ancient and sometimes terrifying when he needed to be, but he was also gentle with her, playful in unexpected moments, surprisingly insecure about things that mattered to him. Do you really like when I read to you? He asked one night, sounding almost shy. Or are you simply humoring me? Brielle looked up from where she'd been curled against his chest, listening to him read Shakespeare in what he claimed was the proper accent. I love it. Your voice is beautiful. And the way you read, like you're remembering rather than performing, it's special. His smile was pleased and relieved in equal measure. I wanted to share something of my world with you. Poetry, art, the beauty I've experienced. So much of what I am is darkness and blood. I want you to see the light, too." She did see it. In the art he collected, some of it painted by his own hand over the centuries. In the music he played on an antique piano, compositions from eras long past. In the garden on the penthouse terrace where he grew night-blooming flowers specifically because they reminded him of beauty and darkness. "You're romantic," Brielle accused, watching him carefully transplant a moonflower. "I've had centuries to cultivate romanticism," Xavian replied, not looking up from his work. "And never anyone worthy of directing it toward. You bring out the best in me. You were good before I came along. I was powerful. There's a difference." He set down the plant, brushing dirt from his hands before turning to face her. "Power without purpose is just destruction waiting for an outlet. You've given me purpose, Brielle. You've reminded me what I'm protecting and why it matters." But not everything was romantic evenings and philosophical discussions. The supernatural world Xavian governed intruded regularly, and Brielle got her first real glimpse of the Vampire King at work when she accompanied him to what he called court. It was held in a massive underground chamber beneath the building, accessed through passages that looked medieval, despite being maintained with modern security. The space was filled with vampires, dozens of them, all pale and beautiful and dangerous looking, arranged in a careful hierarchy she didn't fully understand. Xavian sat on an actual throne, and the transformation was startling. Gone was the gentle romantic man who read her poetry. In his place sat a king, radiating authority and power that made even the oldest vampires bow their heads in respect. Brielle watched from a seat beside his throne, a position that caused ripples of reaction through the gathered vampires as Xavian heard disputes, passed judgments, and managed the complex politics of his bloodline. He was fair but absolute, his word final and unquestioned. When one vampire challenged his ruling, the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees, and shadows literally writhed at Xavian's command until the challenger submitted. "You're scary when you do that," Brielle whispered after the challenger had been dismissed. "I'm a king," Xavian replied quietly, his hand finding hers on the armrest. "Sometimes that requires being frightening, but never to you, fierce one, never to you." The gathered court noticed the gesture, noticed the way their fearsome king held a human's hand with careful tenderness. The whispers started immediately, but Xavian silenced them with a look. "Brielle Sutton is under my personal protection," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "She is precious to me. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or speaks ill of her will face my judgment personally. I want this understood by every member of this bloodline." The assembled vampires bowed as one. "Yes, my lord," they echoed. Later, back in the penthouse, Brielle watched Xavian remove the formal coat he'd worn to court, transforming back into the man she knew. "That was intense," she said. "That was politics." He came to sit beside her, pulling her close. "I'm sorry you had to see that side of things. I know it's not pleasant. It's part of who you are. I want to know all of you, not just the parts you think are safe to show me." Xavian was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "I've done terrible things, Brielle. In my early years as a vampire, I was a monster by any definition. I killed without remorse, took what I wanted, cared nothing for the lives I destroyed. It took decades to develop anything resembling a conscience." "But you did develop one," Brielle said quietly. "You changed. That matters." "Does it? The people I killed are still dead. The damage I caused still exists." His voice was heavy with old guilt. "Sometimes I wonder if I deserve happiness after everything I've done." She turned to face him fully, taking his face in her hands. "Xavian, listen to me. You're not that vampire anymore. You've built laws to protect humans. You punish vampires who kill indiscriminately. You've spent 2 centuries trying to be better. That's not nothing." "You make me want to be better still," he murmured, leaning into her touch. "Every day you remind me why mortal lives matter, why protecting the vulnerable is important. You've become my conscience, fierce one. That's a lot of pressure. You handle it beautifully." Their kiss was gentle this time, full of understanding and acceptance. When they parted, Brielle rested her forehead against his, breathing in his cold, familiar scent. "I love you," she said quietly. The first time she'd spoken the words aloud, though they had been true for weeks. "I know it's fast and probably stupid, but I do. I love you." Xavian's eyes went impossibly soft. "I love you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought possible. You've become my whole world, Brielle. That's still concerning from a psychological standpoint. I don't care." He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "You're mine and I'm yours, and nothing else matters." It should have felt suffocating, but it didn't. Instead, it felt safe in a way Brielle had never experienced. She was loved completely, protected absolutely, cherished beyond measure, and she loved him back with equal intensity, this impossible vampire who'd caught her when she fell and given her a life she'd never dreamed possible. But happiness, she was learning, had a way of attracting danger. The attack came on a Tuesday evening, 3 months into her life with Xavian. She was walking back to the penthouse from her last class of the day, accompanied by Marcus, one of Xavian's most trusted vampires who'd become her unofficial bodyguard. The street was busy with normal evening traffic, humans going about their lives unaware of the supernatural world around them. Brielle never saw the attackers coming. One moment she was chatting with Marcus about her economics exam. The next, he'd shoved her behind him with inhuman speed, his body tensing. 3 figures emerged from the crowd vampires, she could tell now, recognizing the telltale signs. But these looked different from Xavian's court, older somehow, with red eyes instead of silver. "The Western bloodline sends greetings," one of them said, his voice dripping with malice, "and a message for your king." "You're in northern territory without permission," Marcus said coldly, positioning himself between Brielle and the threats. "Leave now or face consequences." "We'll leave," the vampire agreed, with the human. Everything happened too fast for Brielle to fully process. Marcus moved to defend her, but one of the attackers was faster, impossibly faster. There was a blur of motion, a sickening crunch, and Marcus went down hard. The lead vampire reached for her, his hand closing around her arm with crushing force. Then darkness exploded around them, and suddenly Xavian was there. She'd never seen him like this, pure fury given physical form, moving with speed that made the attackers look frozen. One moment the vampire had her arm. The next, that vampire was across the street, embedded in a wall with a crater around his impact point. The other 2 tried to run, but shadows literally rose up to trap them, writhing darkness that held them in place while Xavian advanced. "You dare," he said, and his voice was death itself. "You dare touch what is mine." "We were ordered, one started." "I don't care." Xavian's hand closed around the vampire's throat. "You touched her. You threatened her. You've signed your death warrant." "Xavian," Brielle managed, her voice shaking. "Xavian, I'm okay. Please." He froze at her voice, his head turning toward her. His eyes were pure black now, no hint of silver, and his features had shifted slightly sharper, more predatory, more obviously inhuman. This was the monster beneath the civilized exterior, and it was terrifying. But when he saw her standing there, frightened but unharmed, something changed. The blackness faded from his eyes back to silver. His features softened. He released the vampire he'd been holding, letting the creature drop to the ground, gasping. "Marcus," Xavian said, and his second-in-command climbed to his feet despite obvious injuries. "Take these 3 to the holding cells. I'll deal with them later." His gaze returned to Brielle. "After I ensure she's safe." Then he was beside her, pulling her against his chest with arms that trembled slightly. "Are you hurt? Did they harm you? Tell me you're all right." "I'm fine," Brielle said, though she was shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "I'm okay. You got here in time." "I felt you," Xavian murmured against her hair. "Your fear, your pain when he grabbed you. I've never moved so fast in my entire existence." He swept her up into his arms, and they were moving, that impossible vampire speed carrying them back to the penthouse in seconds. Once there, he set her down on their bed. It had become their bed weeks ago, though they hadn't discussed it, and ran careful hands over her arms, her shoulders, checking for injuries with gentle precision. "I'm fine," Brielle repeated. "Really, you stopped them." "I should have prevented them from getting that close." His voice was thick with self-recrimination. "I should have had more guards. I should have—" "Xavian, stop." She caught his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You can't control everything. Bad things happen. But you saved me. I'm safe because of you." You were in danger because of me, he countered. Those were Western bloodline vampires. They came for you to hurt me, to demonstrate that my protection isn't absolute. You're a target because I love you. The reality of that settled over her like cold water. So what do we do? I'm going to make it abundantly clear what happens to anyone who threatens you. His expression went hard. I'm going to send a message to the Western bloodline that will make them regret ever speaking your name. That sounds like vampire politics. That sounds like war, Xavian corrected grimly. Which I'm prepared to wage if necessary. Nobody threatens you and lives, Brielle. Nobody. She should have been frightened by the vehemence in his voice, by the promise of violence. Instead, she felt oddly safe. This was what it meant to be loved by a vampire king, absolute protection backed by absolute power. What will you do with the vampires who attacked? She asked quietly. That depends on what they tell me about who sent them and why. His hand cupped her cheek. Do you want to be there when I question them? Should I be? You should be wherever you feel comfortable, but they threatened you. You have a right to hear what they have to say. Brielle thought about it, then nodded slowly. I want to understand. I want to know what we're dealing with. Then you'll be by my side, Xavian said simply. Always. The interrogation took place 2 hours later in a chamber deep beneath the building, in what Xavian casually referred to as the dungeons, as if that was a normal thing for a penthouse to have. The 3 attacking vampires were chained to a wall with silver, which, she learned, actually did hurt vampires in large quantities and looked significantly less confident than they had on the street. Brielle sat in a chair beside Xavian's, watching as he questioned them with cold precision. The story that emerged was troubling. The Western bloodline's king, a vampire named Constantine, saw Xavian's attachment to a human as weakness to exploit. Taking or killing Brielle was supposed to destabilize the northern bloodline, create chaos that the West could take advantage of. Constantine always was a fool, Xavian said coldly, to think I would be weakened rather than enraged by threats to what I love. You'll return to him with a message. What message? The lead vampire asked, fear clear in his voice. That if he or any of his bloodline come within a mile of Brielle Sutton, I will personally dismantle his entire court and leave him to face the sun alone. Xavian's voice was soft, which somehow made it more terrifying. I will rain destruction on the Western bloodline until they beg for mercy I won't grant. I will show them exactly why I've held Northern territory for 2 centuries, despite constant challenges. Am I absolutely clear? Yes, my lord, all 3 vampires chorused. Good. Marcus will escort you to the border. If I see you in my territory again, I'll kill you on sight. After they'd been removed, Brielle turned to Xavian. Will that work? The threat? Constantine is ambitious but not suicidal. He'll back off once he understands I'm willing to go to war over you. Xavian pulled her from her chair into his lap, holding her close. I meant every word, Brielle. I will burn the world to keep you safe. That's intense. That's love. His lips brushed her temple. For me, at least. Mortal love might be gentler, but vampire love is absolute. You're mine to protect, mine to cherish. I won't fail at that. She should probably be concerned about the possessiveness in his tone, but she understood it now. This was what he'd been trying to tell her from the beginning. Vampire emotions ran deeper, fiercer, more completely than human ones. When Xavian said he loved her, he meant it with an intensity that defied human understanding. I love you too, Brielle said quietly, even though you're a little scary sometimes. Only to people who threaten you. To you, I'm a teddy bear. She laughed despite the tension of the evening. You're really not, but I appreciate the sentiment. The attack's aftermath brought changes. Xavian increased security around her, though he did it subtly enough that she didn't feel suffocated. Marcus recovered from his injuries within days. Vampire healing was impressive, and assigned himself as her permanent guard, a role he took seriously to the point of being endearing. You don't have to walk me to every class, Brielle protested after the 3rd day of him escorting her across campus. The king would destroy me if you were harmed on my watch, Marcus replied cheerfully. Also, I like you. You're good for him. So I'm invested in keeping you alive. That's weirdly sweet. I'm a weirdly sweet vampire. It's my thing. But despite the increased security, life settled back into something resembling normal. Brielle finished her semester with perfect grades, celebrated by Xavian throwing an elaborate dinner party with just the two of them and food he'd somehow learned to cook despite not eating it. They celebrated holidays together, Xavian embracing Christmas with enthusiasm that suggested he'd missed celebrating for decades. "I haven't bothered with Christmas in 50 years, he admitted, hanging ornaments on a massive tree he'd had installed in the penthouse. "It felt pointless when I was alone. Now it feels magical." "You're such a sap," Brielle said fondly, but she was smiling as she helped him decorate. "Only for you." They exchanged gifts on Christmas morning. Brielle gave him a leather-bound journal filled with her thoughts about their time together, observations and memories and confessions of love written in her own hand. Xavian stared at it like she'd given him the world. "This is the most precious thing I've ever received," he said quietly, running careful fingers over the pages. "Thank you doesn't begin to cover it." His gift to her was a key on a silver chain. "Key to what?" she asked, confused. "Everything. This building. My bank accounts. My entire existence." Xavian's expression was serious. "I want you to have access to all of it. I trust you completely, Brielle." "That's a huge gesture. It's an accurate representation of how I feel." He fastened the chain around her neck. "You hold the keys to my heart already. This is just making it official for the rest of my world." She kissed him then, deep and passionate, and they spent Christmas morning tangled together in bed, exploring each other with hands and lips and whispered words of love. Brielle had been nervous about this step in their relationship. Intimacy with a vampire seemed fraught with danger, but Xavian was careful and controlled and absolutely devoted to her pleasure. "I love you," he murmured against her skin, mapping her body with reverent attention. "My fierce one, my brave, beautiful human. You've given me everything." "I love you too," Brielle gasped, losing herself in sensation and emotion. "So much." Afterward, lying wrapped in his arms, she felt complete in a way she'd never experienced. This was right. This was home. This impossible vampire king and his gothic penthouse and his absolute love, all of it had become her world. "What are you thinking?" Xavian asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her back. "That I never want this to end," Brielle admitted. "That I'm terrified of aging while you stay the same. That I don't know how to reconcile the fact that I'm going to get old and you're going to watch it happen." His arms tightened around her. "I've been thinking about that too." And there are options, if you want them." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "I could turn you, make you vampire. We'd have eternity together." Brielle's breath caught. She'd known this was a possibility, but hearing him actually offer it felt momentous. That's a huge decision. "The biggest," Xavian agreed, "which is why I'm not pressuring you. If you want to live your mortal life, grow old naturally, I'll be beside you every step. I'll love you just as much when you're elderly as I do now. But if you want forever," he paused, "if you want forever, I can give you that." "What would it mean? Being vampire?" "You'd be immortal, barring violence or extreme circumstances. You'd be stronger, faster, harder to kill. You'd need blood to survive, though we have ethical ways of obtaining it. You'd be part of my world completely, able to navigate vampire politics and society, and you'd be mine forever, if you wanted." Brielle's heart was racing. "What about the sun, the weaknesses?" "Sunlight burns, but doesn't immediately kill unless you're exposed for extended periods. Most of us navigate during the day with precautions. You'd lose some human experiences, taste diminishes, food becomes unnecessary. You'd outlive everyone you know from your mortal life. It's not a decision to make lightly." "Would you want me to?" she asked quietly. "Become vampire." "I want whatever makes you happiest," Xavian said firmly. "Selfishly, yes, I want eternity with you. I want to never face the day you die, but I won't pressure you into becoming something you don't want to be. The choice is entirely yours, and I'll love you regardless of what you decide." She believed him. That was the extraordinary thing. She trusted completely that he meant every word. Xavian would love her mortal or immortal, young or old, human or vampire. His love was absolute in ways she was still learning to comprehend. "I need to think about it," Brielle said. "It's too big to decide right now." "Take all the time you need. Years if you want. The offer doesn't expire." He kissed her forehead gently. "I'm patient. I've waited centuries for you. I can wait longer for you to be ready." And so life continued, beautiful and strange and utterly surreal. Brielle finished her degree with honors, started building the ethical business consulting firm she'd always dreamed of. Xavian supported her completely, using his connections to help her get started while ensuring she received full credit for her own accomplishments. "You're brilliant at this," he said after sitting in on one of her presentations to a potential client. "The way you broke down their ethical concerns and provided practical solutions, that was masterful." "You're biased." "I'm observant. You're going to change how businesses think about ethics, Brielle. You're going to make a real difference." His faith in her was unwavering, and she found herself growing into the confidence he saw in her. Her firm started small, but grew quickly, her reputation for integrity and insight spreading through business circles. She hired employees, signed major clients, built something meaningful that was entirely hers. And through it all, Xavian was there. Supporting, encouraging, loving her with that fierce vampire intensity that never wavered. They were partners in every sense, navigating both her world and his together. "You're coming to court tonight?" he asked one evening as they were getting ready. "Wouldn't miss it," Brielle replied, adjusting the elegant dress he'd commissioned for her dark blue silk that somehow managed to look both modern and timelessly Gothic. "I like watching you be all kingly. You like watching me be intimidating." "That too." At court, she sat beside his throne, as had become customary, and the vampires of the northern bloodline no longer whispered about the human king's consort. They'd accepted her, respected her even, won over by her refusal to be intimidated, and Xavian's absolute devotion to her. "The king is happy," Marcus commented one evening after court had dismissed. "Happier than I've ever seen him in the century I've served." "I try," Brielle said lightly. "You succeed. You've been good for all of us, actually. He's more patient now, more thoughtful in his judgments. Love suits him." Love suited her too, Brielle was discovering. She'd never been this happy, this fulfilled, this absolutely certain that she was exactly where she belonged. Every day with Xavian brought new moments of joy, his laughter when she made terrible vampire puns, his concentration when she explained business concepts he'd never encountered, his tenderness when they made love. But the question of mortality hung between them, growing more pressing as time passed. 2 years into their relationship, Brielle found herself staring at her reflection and noticing the subtle changes that came with aging. Small lines at the corners of her eyes, a maturity to her features that hadn't been there before. "I'm getting older," she said one evening, surprising herself by speaking the thought aloud. Xavian looked up from his book. "You're aging beautifully." "I'm aging while you're not. In 10 years, 20, 50, I'll be elderly and you'll still look like this." She gestured at his unchanged perfection. "People already give us weird looks when we're out together." "I don't care what people think." "But I do. And more than that," she turned to face him fully, "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to die and leave you alone again." His expression softened with understanding. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I want you to turn me," Brielle said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've thought about it. I've researched what it means. I've imagined both futures, growing old with you or staying young with you. And I choose staying. I choose forever. I choose us." Xavian was across the room in an instant, pulling her into his arms with careful strength. "Are you absolutely certain? There's no going back once it's done." "I'm certain. I love you. I love our life. I want to be your partner truly, to navigate your world as an equal, to have eternity to build everything we're building together." She looked up at him steadily. "Turn me, Xavian. Make me yours forever." The joy on his face was radiant. "When?" "Soon, after I settle my business affairs, say goodbye to my mortal life properly." "A month?" "A month," he agreed. "And then forever." The month that followed was surreal. Brielle put her affairs in order, transferred power of attorney to trusted colleagues who could run her firm in her absence, created cover stories about moving abroad. It felt like preparing for death, which in a sense it was the death of her mortality, her human life. "Are you scared?" Marcus asked one evening as he helped her pack up her old apartment. She'd decided to formally give it up, to fully commit to the penthouse and the life she'd built there. "Terrified," Brielle admitted, "but also excited. I'm choosing this, you know? I'm choosing him and this life and everything that comes with it." "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. You two are good together. You balance him." Marcus smiled. "And once you're vampire, you can finally drink at vampire court events. The blood wine is actually quite good." "That's the weirdest selling point ever, but I'll keep it in mind." The night they'd chosen for her turning was clear and cold, winter settling over the city like a blanket. Xavian had prepared his bedroom with candles and soft music, making it as romantic as possible despite the gravity of what they were about to do. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, taking her hands in his. "I love you regardless. You don't have to do this." "I want to," Brielle said firmly. "Turn me, make me yours forever." His kiss was gentle, reverent, full of love and promise. Then his lips moved to her throat, finding her pulse with unerring accuracy. "This will hurt," he warned. "I'm sorry for that. I trust you." She felt his fangs pierce her skin, a sharp pain followed by a strange, cold numbness spreading from the wound. Her blood flowed into him, and with it, her mortal life. Brielle felt herself growing weaker, colder, her heartbeat slowing. This was death, she realized distantly. She was dying. Then Xavian pulled back, biting his own wrist and holding it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded gently. "Drink and be reborn." His blood tasted like winter storms and ancient power and promise. Brielle drank deeply, feeling something fundamental change in her body as vampire blood mixed with her own. Her dying heart stuttered, stopped, then started again with a different rhythm. Power flooded through her veins, cold and intoxicating, and wrong in all the ways that somehow felt right. When she finally pulled back, gasping, the world had changed. She could hear everything, heartbeats from floors below, conversations from the street, the rustle of wind against windows. She could see in the darkness as clearly as daylight, could smell the complex mix of scents that made up the city. And she felt strong, powerful, alive in ways she'd never imagined. "Welcome to immortality," Xavian said softly, gathering her into his arms. "How do you feel?" "Like everything just became more," Brielle managed. "More intense, more vivid, more real." "Is it always like this?" "Your senses will settle after a few days, but yes, the world is different for our kind." He stroked her hair gently. "You're still you, Brielle, just enhanced. The person I love hasn't changed." She looked at her hands, marveling at how her skin had taken on that same translucent pale quality as his. Her senses were overwhelming but incredible, and when she met Xavian's eyes in the mirror across the room, she saw her own eyes had shifted to silver, matching his. "We match now," she said with wonder, "in every way that matters." His arms tightened around her. "My queen, my love, my forever." The adjustment to vampire life was easier than Brielle expected, probably because she had Xavian guiding her through every step. He taught her to control her new strength so she didn't accidentally break everything she touched, showed her how to feed from donors ethically and carefully, explained the complex politics of vampire society now that she was part of it. "You're the king's consort," Marcus explained during one of her lessons. "That makes you second only to Xavian in our hierarchy. People will defer to you, seek your favor, possibly try to manipulate you. You need to be careful." "I'm not good at politics." "You're better than you think. You've been navigating our court for 2 years as a human. Now you have the power to back up your position." He was right, Brielle discovered. Being vampire changed how others perceived her. The northern bloodline vampires who'd once been wary now treated her with respect bordering on reverence. At her first court appearance after her turning, Xavian formally announced her new status. "Brielle Corvus," he said, and she had taken his name at his request, "my consort and queen. She speaks with my authority and is to be afforded every courtesy due her station." The gathered vampires bowed as one, and Brielle felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She was part of this world now, truly and completely. There was no going back, and she found she didn't want to. Life as an immortal was strange and wonderful. Her business continued to thrive, though she made adjustments for her new nature meetings scheduled for evenings, contracts with trusted human representatives for daytime operations. She discovered she could still do meaningful work while being vampire, still make a difference in the world. "You're remarkable," Xavian said one evening after she'd successfully negotiated a major ethical overhaul for a multinational corporation. "Most new vampires struggle to maintain their mortal interests. You've made yours flourish." "I had a good teacher," Brielle replied, pulling him into a kiss, "and a supportive partner who believes in me. Always." Years passed in a blur of happiness. They traveled together, Xavian showing her centuries-old hideaways and historical sites he'd witnessed being built. They attended vampire gatherings where Brielle met kings and queens from other bloodlines, earning respect through her intelligence and refusal to be intimidated. They built a life that was rich and full and deeply meaningful. "I never thought I could be this happy," Brielle admitted one evening as they stood on their terrace, watching the city lights twinkle below. 5 years had passed since her turning, and they'd been the best years of her existence. "Neither did I," Xavian said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You've given me everything I didn't know I needed. Purpose, joy, love that makes eternity feel like it might actually be long enough." "Sap. You're sap." She leaned back against him, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. This impossible love story, exhausted Waitress and Vampire King, had become her entire world, and she wouldn't change a single thing. "Thank you," Brielle said quietly. "For what?" "For catching me when I fell, for seeing me when I was invisible, for loving me enough to give me forever." Xavian turned her in his arms, his silver eyes shining with emotion. "Thank you for letting me, for choosing this life, this love, this future, for making me remember what it means to be alive even in immortality." Their kiss was perfect, full of promise and passion and the certainty of forever. Below them, the city continued its mortal rhythms, but up here in their Gothic sanctuary, time moved differently. They had centuries ahead of them, endless nights to fill with love and laughter and the rich complexity of immortal existence. And as they stood together under the stars, Vampire King and his queen, Brielle knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Every step of this impossible journey, from collapsing in a diner to waking in his arms to choosing eternity, had led her exactly where she belonged. In love, in power, in a happiness that would last forever. The end was really just the beginning, and they had all of eternity to write the rest of their story together.